Is it coming? We are live actually.
So, friends, welcome to today I have the pleasure of introducing to you and welcoming my very dear friend, Professor Prasad Bidaye. He teaches at Humboldt Institute of Technology. My voice is in Toronto. He has been kind enough to visit us at. I'm going to get some only for this. Can you use some mic? He's come only for this session, so I'm really grateful to him for this gesture. On behalf of all of you and on behalf of many of your friends who are joining this online today in the live stream of this session, I welcome Prasad with a bouquet of flowers to make it feel a little vibrant and colorful. On behalf of our principal and on behalf of American College, Professor Prasad Bidaye comes from a family of musicians, and he himself also is a great music enthusiast. In addition to what he teaches, he's also active in a group called Indigenous Assistance, and some of the experiences from that he's going to share with us today and introduce to us the two talking about anti-colonialism and indigenous culture and resistance. He's going to introduce to us the connection between art and activism. Okay, and he's a fantastic speaker, so far better than me. Therefore, I know that he will engage you much better than I could do that. Thank you, Prasad, for being with us today.
Thank you, everybody. I want to say thank you very much for coming up. Thank you for all the department, all the faculty for welcoming me today, and for all the beautiful faces I see in the room. It's a true honor. I get emotional. I'm from Canada. I'm born in Canada. And I speak to everyone from Canada today. It's going to be a little bit emotional. Okay, great. Now, I just want to give a warm welcome to everyone who's online and who's watching today. I shared a link for people in North America as well too, so we might be having from all over the world with all of you here today. Okay. So, my talk today for Ahmednagar is called Art and Activism, an Anti-Colonial Perspective from Canada, where I'm born and raised. My parents came to Canada in the 1960s, so I didn't have a choice. I was born in Canada. But the actual name of this talk is Outer Nationalist Dub in the Work of IR Indigenous Resistance. Okay. And if I have three goals for you today, those are to learn three words. I want you to learn, my goal is to teach you the word, what the meaning of the word outer nationalism is. And that one literally done. And I want to go over what the word indigenous means as well. Do I speak clearly enough? We're okay? One time come out here 20 years ago, we went to Baroda and I gave a paper and I had no questions at the end. And I asked a colleague of ours afterwards and she said, we didn't understand your accent. So I hope everyone understands me clearly. If you need clarification, let me know. And of course, I'm looking forward to these questions So yeah, I want people to know those three words: outer nationalism, and I want to review the concept of indigenous. IR, indigenous resistance, is a collective, a global collective of artists and activists who are all working together around the world. It's not a massive collective, but it's a collective nonetheless. We have people here. This is the group of Sankara future Dada surgeons, and they're based in Uganda. We also have the people here from Africa. We have, in the very top corner, we have a mother and daughter who live in Toronto but are actually from South America, Chile, and they're also connected to their indigenous culture from that part of the world. We have a man here in the mask, that's Dansha. He's Bengali, but he's raised or he's from England and is an electronic musician. And then we have a Grey Cloud here, who's an indigenous medicine healer, and he's also based in Canada, the land that we call Canada, with the cultural land. Okay, so we're a collective. We don't all know each other. I haven't met most of these people firsthand, but we all work together. We subvert the internet in order to do things together. Okay? So I want to talk about the method I'm going to use in today's presentation. So the method is, well, this is the method I'm not going to use. When you do literary studies, all of you guys are doing literary studies. You're studying English literature, correct? Many of you are. We do English literature studies, and I did English literature studies too. You're taught to look at texts from a distance. You're supposed to keep yourself out of the picture, almost like it's an object, like you're looking at a book or poem under a microscope. And I think that's important. I think it's important. But what I want to do today is a little bit different. I want to look at the work of IR, of indigenous resistance, and I want to look at the perspective of someone who's a participant in IR, someone who's also coming at it, looking at it from the outside as a scholar. And my training is English literature, specifically post-colonial literature, and especially literature from India and South Asia. So I come from post-colonial studies, post-colonial theory, where we're looking at colonial history from a post-colonial perspective. Right? So I want to work from that dual perspective of being part of IR, but then trying to theorize it based on my scholarship. Okay. What are the three words I said we're going to teach you today? What are the three words? What was it? Outer nationalist, what else? Dove, okay, go right there. And indigenous, okay, let's talk about indigenous. This is another image I happen to be in. We also work in different languages. Okay, so indigenous is a local word, right? Has anyone seen the little Wally with the balloon in the jacket? There's a scene in the movie where the father, Papa's father, he wins the chess game, and he's from England, and he says, "You're ingenious. You're also indigenous." He said this in the movie, right? In Hindi, and he means you're soil from India. You're part of the soil. That's not what indigenous means to me, and it's also not what it means in the context of a post-colonial, anti-colonial framework. Indigenous means something else. I'm also using the definition for indigeneity based on United Nations definition. So let's talk about that. People who are indigenous, they belong to communities with ancestral responsibilities, land, land, water, and other natural resources. And ancestral basically means that this is something they've been doing for generations. They do it through ritual and ceremonies, but they also have their own, ecological methods as well too. They're communities that are, whose cultural responsibility is to nurture and take care and protect the land. So that's what it means to be indigenous. So I always say I'm indigenous, but I don't have responsibilities in my family, and I learned those things. So that's one part. The other one is indigenous means people who don't have political sovereignty over those lands. They don't have governance over those lands, the lands they reside on. Most importantly for today's conversation, the indigenous are those who are to this if I had to say this all in a very simple way, I would just say that being indigenous means to be colonized. My grandparents were from Poland. They were colonized. They were born. They were indigenous. They were born in colonial context. Even my parents. It's different for me because I don't fit into these categories. Right? I am going to talk about this one, which means I'm going to talk a little bit about violence. I'm not going to go into deep detail. I'm giving you a heads up. I will talk about genocide. But I'm going to do it in a way that's ultimately about hope. Okay? So it's positive. Okay, so let's talk about that. So I'm from Canada, and Canada is a former British colony, but Canada itself is a colonial power because there's still indigenous peoples in Canada. There are at this point 1.8 million indigenous peoples in the country I come from, which many indigenous people call Turtle Island. Turtle Island is a mythological story about how the whole indigenous mythology about how the whole planet resides in the back of the turtle. But a lot of indigenous movements use this name Turtle Island to refer to the land that they belong to. So there's 1.8 million people. They're not just communities. They identify as nations, and they're called nations. They're called First Nations. And there's 630 plus of those. 50 of them are nations, which is we're working 50 languages in Canada, indigenous languages in Canada. There's also the Inuit, who are from the northern, near the Arctic Pole, they're not part of the country. And then there's the Métis, who are both of indigenous and European descent, but they never got fully assimilated into settler, white, European, colonial societies. So this is what indigenous means in Canada. All right. So let's talk a little bit about cultural genocide. One of the ways that cultural genocide happens is by occupying the land. Right? And the way it happens is through forced assimilation. The way is through forced assimilation. Right? Assimilation in terms of trying to get people to assimilate, to integrate into a dominant culture. And there's a system for this in the 1800s and 1900s, and that was mostly through education. There was something called the residential school system, and the school system was based on it involved the church, and the church was working with the Catholic Church was working with the Canadian government to basically go to indigenous communities, take their children, basically kidnap them, and put them into schools. And in those schools, they had to cut their hair, they weren't allowed to speak their language, they were punished violently if they did speak their language, they weren't allowed to visit their parents often, and this is all in the name of making them civilized. Okay? One of the shorthand ways of the people who created the system is described as the goal is to kill the Indian in the shadow. The Indian meant native Indian. It's an archaic term. Indian refers to the indigenous of Canada and the United States. And killing the Indian means killing the Indian in order to raise the European in the shadow. That's the Christian in the shadow. A lot of but students didn't learn anything in these schools. They didn't learn anything. They just worked slavishly. And they also experienced tremendous amounts of physical, sexual, violent abuse. It's like a Holocaust that happened in that part of the world. And this has happened up until 1998. The last school closed in 1998. In the 2000s, we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where the survivors of these schools, people who went to these schools, their children whose parents went to these schools, or their grandparents who went to these schools, they came forward to share their stories. And so Canada now is going through a process where it's about trying to reconcile and acknowledge and work with this history, this dark history, in Canada's colonial past. One of the ways that people can do this in schools, which is the one I teach at, is by making land acknowledgements. We often, do the national anthem, but then they'll also make a statement about whose land we are on. That's one of the common ways. My method is a little bit different. I go not to acknowledge the land, but let's acknowledge colonial history. That's still a hard word for a lot of Canadians to accept. And because my post-colonial studies background, it's something that I really feel that's important to talk about. And it's also something that we work a lot with in Indigenous resistance. Okay, so let me give you the first example of what we do in Indigenous resistance that relates directly to this history. Okay, so May 2021, in Kamloops, BC, this is on the west coast of Canada. And there's a First Nation there that's called Kamloops the First Nation, and they made an announcement in the news. And the news was that the remains of 215 bodies were found nearby this school. And they're Indigenous children's bodies, again, at the Kamloops Indian residential schools. And what happened in 2021? Where were we? Where were we?
COVID.
We were at COVID. We were locked down. So everyone is learning about this, not by going to school or going to the office, but they're learning about this on social media. And very common things happening on social media is this kind of statement. How can this happen in Canada? It's outrage. How can this happen? So a lot of people are very surprised. This is also the same time that George Floyd murder. So a lot of people are waking up, white people are waking up to social issues, like racism, like colonialism in North America. For someone like me who's not white, who's a person of color, who's experienced racism, who studies post-colonial studies, this isn't new. And we were all upset when we read this, but I had a critical perspective because 215 bodies is a lot. But I also know that when you study genocide, the numbers are always low, right? Whether you study partition, the Jewish Holocaust, African American slavery, the numbers are always higher than the numbers that are there. So we talked about this in Indigenous resistance, and about a month later, we do a lot of codes, and we'll show you a couple of codes today. One of the codes that we created is this one, 215 plus X. And we made this is a graphic that was made by one of our collaborators in Brazil. And he made this design. The whole idea is to acknowledge the 215 bodies that were found, but then also acknowledge the ones that have not been found, that might never be found, but that we all have a responsibility to find. So we made this graphic, and then June 20, then a week later, we made another graphic, and it looks like this. Africans standing alongside Indigenous children from Turtle Island. And this became part of a social media clip that went on Instagram, on Facebook, and so on and so forth. I want to show the video, but we can't show that particular video. But that's okay. We have the script. So this is a clip from that Instagram video. You see one of our collaborators, Baka Barton. He's standing with his group, Sankara Future Double Surgeries. He's standing with two children, they're holding signs, and they're at Lake Valley, which is the biggest lake in Africa. Uganda. And they're making a video, and it's posted on this day. And I'm going to read to you what they said in the video. We want to honor the 215 Indigenous children whose bodies were found unceremoniously buried on the grounds of a residential school in Kamloops, Canada. We want to acknowledge X, the unknown number of bodies that we discovered at other residential, boarding, and industrial schools throughout North America. The X is also a demand that those bodies must be found at all such institutions of colonial genocide until because African people stand with you. And he did this in English, but he also did it in his own language, in London. So it was a bilingual message. Okay. A month later, and I want you to pay attention to the places that I'm talking about. That was in Africa, that was in Uganda, right? Lake Nalaba. A month later, that same image, 215 plus X, it appears on a street in Bogota, Colombia, the Candelaria district. This is someone that one of our other collaborators, Sula who's a street muralist. They posted that on the middle of the street. Of course, it's the pandemic. So we have a woman, an Afro-Colombian woman, welcome back. She's masked. She's checking it out. I know you can't see the print, but it's the same message, but it's in Spanish. Okay? A little bit later, you see, there's a book, we do books in IR, we do street murals, plus we use it, and we play some music and books. One of the books we have is called Sticking to the Dumps of Violence. It's the same that on the t-shirt today. And one of the images that we feature is this one. It's the same image, but now it's posted on a wall. And same with these two images, they're posted on a wall. This time, it's in Mexico. Okay? So, let's do some review. Okay? We have the announcement that came from the Campos, the Sacramento, we have the image that's made in Brazil. We have the social media post and video that's recorded in Uganda at Lake Nona. We have the mural in Spanish that's posted in Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia. Then we have the poster, the poster of the street mural and the graphics posted in Mexico. And now I'm going to raise, with all this in mind, I'm going to raise a counter. It's not what I believe, but it's what I want. We can think more clearly when we think about the other side, right? And so I think what the other side would say is, why? So one more thing, it's all different language. But the other side would say, why? Why is this happening? And I come to the counter argument, why would any of these people care? Okay? Why would any of these people care? I know why they care. Because it affects them directly. I know why people in Canada, especially white settled people in Canada, and I'm probably settled in some ways too, because it's part of the truth and reconciliation process that's happening in my country. But why does everyone else care? And this is what I think about my Marathi speaking family. They also speak Marathi, many of us do. What is that, right? Swata Bangla Paje, Akito Lokman. They always say, I'm the family friend of them, we look at our family first, we take care of our family first, worry about others. So the next question comes, so why would anyone else care? And it's one thing at the family level, but this also happens at the nation level, right? It levels the nation. India first, Canada first. Donald Trump is the best at this. America first. You don't think about others, you think about yourself. So why would anyone do this? That's the question I'm working with. Why would anyone care? So this is what I've done my scholar. Before we ask why, we ask what. And the real question is, for me today, is what is this? What is all of this? The simple answer to this question is, this is outer nationalism. Okay? So, I'm going to take you through a couple other cases of what we do in IR to explain outer nationalism. But I want to first help us understand that word better. Whenever I try to teach a word or try to understand a word, I break it down. So, to understand outer nationalism, and all my family, they ask me about this talk that I'm doing, I say, what's outer nationalism? It comes to talk. And the other part is, it's simple. We have to first work with nationalism. Are we good so far? We're good so far? We're good so far? Okay. All right. So, let's talk about nationalism. This is your specialty area too. Okay. So, nationalism, we know what nationalism means, but the basic idea for nationalism for me is this idea of, this is called an Benedict Anderson. And this idea of a nation is an imagined community. All of you are a community. You all know each other. But it's a nation when when we create a community of people who don't know each other, when we're all thinking about the same thing, they're all participating in the same election, they're all watching the same news, they're all speaking the same language. That's an imagined community is what makes a nation. Internationalism is when countries work together or don't work together, but they have relationships. But it's always at the elite. It's Trump, Modi, Trudeau, Netanyahu, Putin working and not working together. That is the elites. Transnationalism is used to describe activities that cross borders. Okay? And this is a loaded word, it's a controversial word, it can work in different kinds of ways. But outer nationalism is a form of transnationalism. Right? It's about working across borders. And working across borders but without the elites. But I need to explain this a little bit more further. This is a common word that gets used in post-colonial studies. And it's often used for so many things. Like whether it be McDonald's being able to cross borders, musicians being able to cross borders, indie movies using English music, or Hollywood movies using Hollywood music, right? The other popular word that's used for this kind of thing is hybridity. This idea of cultural mixing. When you have transnational cultures, you have cultural mixing. When I was, in the 90s and 2000s, this was a contested term because on one level it sounds really interesting. It describes what it means that we all become hybrid. We all become products of multiple cultures. But it's also been problematized by scholars. I'm going to get to this. I'm going to work through two scholars. I'm not going to get too deep to the scholars, but I'm going to work through two scholars to show you how I get from here to here. Because I get the critiques. I think there's a way to play this in an outer national framework. Okay, so this is Irish Gibbs. He's born in Turkey, but he's a scholar, he's a sinologist. He's a scholar of China, Chinese history. He wrote a book called The Post-Colonial Era, a critique of post-colonial theory. He's also a Marxist, and his problem with post-colonialism and transnationalism is that it promotes, it basically promotes capitalism. We're talking about transnational corporations that cross borders and exploit people across borders. So he has a problem with that. He also has a problem with this idea of hybridity. That's the part that I'm most interested in. Let's see what he says. The hybridity that post-colonial criticism refers to is uniformly a hybridity between the post-colonial and the first group. Never to my knowledge between one post-colonial intellectual and another. So basically, hybridity is used to talk about cultural mixing, but it always keeps the West in the middle. It always involves the West. It always involves the global North. So that's his critique. And he's right. In most cases, that's how you understand hybridity. But like I said, I still want to hang on to hybridity for the kind of thing that I'm talking about with IR. So for that, I go to this other scholar. This is Paul Gilroy. He's an important figure in Black British studies. And he wrote my favorite book of academic theory of all time, is The Black Atlantic. And when he's trying to do the Black Atlantic, he's trying to understand how do we define diasporic Black culture, right? And he comes back to this idea of transnationalism to talk about how is culture exchanged and transmitted between African, Caribbean, UK, British, North American communities. And there's he does some wordplay to help us understand this. Because many people will say to be Black is to be African, or to be Black is to be African American. Like there's some sort of roots there. And he said, no, it's not about where it's from, it's about how the culture gets transmitted. And so the Black Atlantic is a space where culture is being sent and exchanged and mixed, and we create these kinds of, we create Black culture through those exchanges. And he's being very specific. He's not talking about, like, he's talking basically about, listen, Black culture in this way, that's what Black culture is created, this is how it gets taken up. What has happened since the middle past, when slave trade between African Americans. So I want to use his, and he uses the word nationalism just once in his book. So that's partly where I got the word from. I also got the word from reggae, making reggae music. I tried to write to him and ask him, where did you get this word from? He never replied to my email. Okay, so it's mine. So I want to use our nationalism to this. He's talking about the Black Atlantic, about different types of Black communities working together to produce culture. And I want to use it in a more global way, without putting the West at the center. Okay, so to explain this further, I want to watch a film. The short film that we created is all about nationalism. The people involved are the poet, her name is Prasad. She lives in Arabic. She has a background from South Africa as well as Ethiopia. That's her there. The film is about her going, she's somewhere in the desert, and she's going to meet a veteran man, an indigenous veteran man, I think in North Africa. His name is Muhammad. The film basically is very slow, minimalist film about an international meeting between these two people. And then there's music. And music is a narrator, his name is Bidaye, who's also a DJ and a producer, there's Herman's Prof, who's from Pittsburgh, he made music, and he's from America, but also from Eastern Europe. And then there's this poster that's used, that's created by indigenous artists in Chiapas. Okay, and that's a poster right there. Okay, so we have all the elements, and then the film, it depicts an international encounter, an international meeting between people, and the audio, the spoken element over the music is explaining what international means. So we're going to play that, and the only thing I'm saying is the music that we're playing is actually in style of that. Okay, so that's our first introduction. Are we have to play the video?
Yes.
Yeah. I have to stop sharing,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Okay. So, and could you please minimize? Could you please open the? That's right. That's right. So no limits. That one. No limits.
No limits. Yeah.
Modern nationalism. Modern nationalism. Modern nationalism. Modern nationalism. Modern nationalism. Outer nationalism is the flow of dub between nations. The critical dialogue, the creative dialogue, the friendships, and the solidarities that develop between people from different nations and in the defiance of the borders that divide them. The poets, the sound systems, the protesters, the prophets, the underground club scenes, the street demonstrations, and other forms of collective resistance. Because there is no limit to love. No limit. There is no limit to love. There is no limit to love. There is no limit. participant in the Algerian Revolution, Malcolm X's dialogues with Japanese internment survivor Yuri Koshiyama, Jamaica's Kanote Frankson, and the unknown black anarchists back in barracks fighting fascism in Franco Spain, and Ho Chi Minh attending Marcus Garvey lectures in Harlem, New York. These are outer national stories of people who were never exclusively tied to the nations that claimed them. They were connected and committed to multiple causes. Outer nationalism.
Small piece there. Okay. Can we go to PowerPoint?
Yes, sir. So you have to share the screen, please.
Can you help me with that?
Can you do it?
If you switch to PowerPoint, then you can. The last part of the video. The last part of the video gives more explanation on how much pandemics have been for like generations. They can have ancestral possibilities. I'll show there's a part of the audio that the spoken word is in English, so I'll show exactly what is being said there. You take it to that, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we should. Okay.
Just
So let me do this. Let me do this. I'll put it on the screen so you can see what is. This is what the main thing is saying. That part where the we're going to get into it.
Yes, 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 yes.
So that means we should talk to each other for a bit.
Please. So I'm trying to, I don't know.
Do we lose it? Or?
No. It's going on, sir.
Okay.
But the audio, there's some technical issue with the audio.
Okay. No problem. No problem. No problem. So the microphone's not on.
No, sir. It's not. Yeah, they take care. Or else, so the live is on. We do not use. No, but we have to.
It's because of the microphone.
So it's big. No, there's some. Just a minute, sir. I'll just leave the studio. Just give me.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello. Yes, sure.
Does anyone have any questions so far? That means I'm doing a bad job. Questions, we can take some questions until. Ready? Yeah, we're ready? We're ready? We're ready. Okay. All right. So we just watched the video. Thanks again to Gaurav for fixing everything up. So we're back online. the video we watched, Our Nationalism, there was a part where the vocal got clipped, but I'll try to summarize really quickly what was happening. It's basically about two people from very different cultural backgrounds, even economic backgrounds, and they're having a meeting in the desert, and they're gonna have a cup of tea, and they're gonna look at the book, and they're doing this they're doing this in defiance of the borders that divide them, right? And I would say that is the key phrase here. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple more examples of outer nationalism in the work that we do with IR to develop this further. Okay, but before we do that, let's go back to our theoretical concepts. So when we're talking about nationalism, we're talking about relationships of citizens to citizens, okay? Internationalism is nation to nation, state to state, elite to elite. Outer nationalism is a form of transnationalism, but it's unique because it's about the oppressed meeting the oppressed. It's the relationship between the racialized, people who experience racism, and other people who experience racism. It's those who are colonized meeting other people who are colonized, those on the margins, margin to margin, but also counterculture to counterculture and resistance to resistance. These two are very important for me because outer nationalism is not just about suffering. It's also about having agency and power to do something about that with these types of relationships. Okay. In the video, we saw them looking at this book. So this book is called Indigenous and Black Wisdom. It's one of the first books that we produced through IR. And there's two images that I really want to focus on and do some analysis with that develops this further. Okay, so the first one is of a single mother, a mother, her two children. She's an indigenous woman, so she's from Turtle Island, and she's on the street in Jamaica. And what we're seeing behind her are records and Jamaican reggae stars, but specifically Jamaican reggae stars of the 1970s, which was a countercultural period of, Rastafarian and Pan-African consciousness, Black power consciousness in Jamaican reggae music. It's kind of like the way parallel cinema was a time of of social commentary in Indian cinema. The same things were happening in Jamaican music at the time. So they're on the street, and this is behind them. You have two indigenous men from Turtle Island again, and this time they're at a record shop in Jamaica. So records are an important part of the story here, and records are an important part. Music is an important part of dub. But what we're seeing here are not actual real pictures. You remember how I talked about nationalism as a form of imagined community? This is what I would call imagined outer nationalism. It's basically taking two types of images and putting them, using Photoshop or whatever technology to create a relationship. And it has different meanings. I'll start with the main one is Black people in America and the Caribbean, what we call the West Indies, and indigenous people in Turtle Island. These are two of the most oppressed groups in North America. Okay, that's number one. Number two, when we think of Jamaica, we think of tourism. We think of beaches. We think of people having fun, but we don't see this type of Jamaica. In tourism, we don't see this side of Jamaica being represented. This kind of socially, politically engaged, this kind of resistance culture, this kind of counterculture, that Pan-African Black power side of Jamaica being represented in tourism. Similarly, we never see images of people from Turtle Island, indigenous people, traveling. The same with India. You're never going to see people, Adivasis, being put on posters, traveling. And here, the idea is that even though you're seeing a group of people and you're seeing signs of a different culture, the idea is that they're both learning from each other. They're both learning from each other. And we're imagining what they, how they can learn from each other, but it's also a long history of Black and indigenous people working together in different ways. So that's where a lot of the work started off with IR. Over the years, things have gotten more, I don't want to use the word global, but that's probably the best word to use in terms of talking about a larger spectrum of culture. So in the pandemic, we made a film, and hopefully we can show this film at the end of the talk today. It's called When Silence Rises from the Earth. This was recorded at in Uganda right at the end of December 2020, and we had this space called the Dub Museum, which is a space that this group of people, this band, Sankara Future Dub Resurgence, uses for art and music and performance. And it's a small little space, but we populated it with all kinds of images. In the same way in the photo collage we just looked at, we're trying to get images to talk to each other, right? So let's look at a couple of them. So this is Frantz Fanon, who's one of the most important anti-colonial philosophers and he was born in the Caribbean, but he studied in France and he became an important figure. He's mentioned in the video that we just watched as a member of a participant in the Algerian Revolution. He's looking up. We see his words here. This woman who sees without being seen frustrates the colonizer. That's one from one of his books. We see a woman from Palestine. She's preparing herself for a rally, for a protest rally. We see the African-American novelist, James Baldwin, also looking up at her. We see images of gray clouds. The man I talked about earlier on, who's a healer in Turtle Island. We look at his clinic, his office. We have the Jamaican artist Augustus Pablo featured here as well too. And then we have posters here about the genocide in West Papua, nearby Indonesia. We have a couple of posters about that, but there are also posters from people in South America, in Colombia, and so on and so forth. And then we have images of the artist John Cage and Sun Ra. John Cage, who inspired this video, or at least, inspired it in many ways. And then Frantz Fanon looking back at all of it. So all these images, the idea that all these images are there to talk to each other. They're not just put up there arbitrarily. They're all talking to each other. Okay, so that's more on a symbolic level. I'll give you an actual form of outer nationalism. Okay, this is an intense image. This is a very powerful image. You can read it two ways. This is a woman in Brazil, and she's a Cricati woman. She comes from the Cricati indigenous community in Brazil. It looks like she's being pushed over with her child. She's being pushed over by the army. It's the other way around. She's holding the army back while holding her child. The Cricati were our community in Brazil who in the early 2000s, they were being pushed off their land in Brazil. But then they pushed back, and they did this by destroying power towers, electrical power towers, and they managed to keep their land by resisting back. So IR did a piece of music about, to raise awareness about this situation. And it featured two artists. Does everyone know what EDM is? Has ever heard of EDM, electronic dance music, rave music? You've probably heard it, but you might not know what the name is. But there's two figures I want to show. I don't like that word, electronic dance music, but that's the ballpark we're talking about. So this is Mad Mike Banks. He's from a group called Underground Resistance. It's also a collective of electronic musicians. Most of them are Black, although he's Black and also of Choctaw, of indigenous background. So he comes from that, he's hybrid in that sense, in terms of his ancestry. And then there's Dangsha, who we talked about before, Aniruddha Das, who's an electronic musician as well too, but he's a Bengali background, but based in the UK. These are two people who make the same type of music. They make electronic music, but they come from different countries, they come from different backgrounds, and they have completely different audiences. So his fans don't know his fans, and vice versa. So we were able to do a track where they weren't in the same room together, but they were sharing files over the internet in order to make a track together. This is what we would call a super group, right? We have two major figures working together. What makes this more outer national is that they're not just working together, they're working together to produce a track that has spoken word about this issue, okay? And that piece of music is called Cricketing. I want to take another look at a code here. Let's look at his t-shirt. And this is a t-shirt called Anarchist Africa. And it's got 4 symbols on this. And let's go over the 4 symbols together. The first symbol is of the African continent, right? Whenever we see this, especially in hip hop culture, in rap music, especially when I was younger, it often means Pan-Africanism. It means Pan-African unity, right? That's what it usually means. And it's coming from an anti-colonial nationalist kind of, like Pan-Africanism, of all these African nations working together, and finding empowerment that way. So that's a very common image. Below that is this image, which represents, it's the A for anarchist punk, and it's often used in punk rock music, right? Many people know this image. Many people know this image. Many people have not seen these two images together. And many people would argue, I'm making generalizations when I say many people, but I think I have a point here to make. Many people would think of this as being a European thing, a British thing, a white boys thing, okay? They look at it that way. They would never think of Africa as having anarchist history, pre-colonial anarchist history. We missed the ending of the video that we just watched. We talk about, we often talk about pre-colonial Africa in terms of having kings, the great kings and great queens and that kind of thing. But one of the things that we try to do in IR, we talk about indigenous African communities that were decentralized without, they're working without hierarchies to kind of work with the land instead of trying to create kingdoms. And that for us is anarchism. That for us is anarchism. So that there's an intervention here to think about this, this type of philosophy, but in an African context. The third symbol is Jugad, which I think most of you know, right? Jugad, most of you know. We even laugh about it a little bit. we all know, we're not laughing, we're smiling because we know what this word means. I was attending an online event featuring two South Asian artists from Canada. They're both Punjabi. One of them was my friend Angela Achla, and they were talking about, the person she was with, the other artist, I forget her name, but she said, sometimes I just have to Jugad it. I just have to Jugad it. And then she explained, you do what you can with what you have. And I just closed my mouth and I was like, oh my gosh, I just found out the Indian word for punk rock, the Indian word for anarchist punk rock. Because anarchist is a threatening word. People think, oh, people who are into anarchism, they believe in full chaos. They want to destroy society. They want to, and they're violent and they want to just destroy everything. Anarchism as a philosophy is about doing things yourself, being fully independent. So for example, if you can't afford a computer, you build a computer. If you're looking to get signed or to get published, if you can't do that, you self-publish. You put out your own music, you do it yourself. And you do it with the means you have rather than trying to find new technologies, new products, and those kinds of things. And so Jugad, we're putting Jugad here as a way to speak back to, again, to decolonize this idea of anarchism, that it's not just a European, white boy, British, American thing, right? The last one is this one right here, and that's Amharic. That's the language that's used in Ethiopia. And that's basically saying resistance dub. And this is the part when everyone says, okay, Prasad, what is dub? What is dub? Okay, I'll tell you what is dub. This is all outer nationalism. I think you can see how this is all outer nationalism. What makes this dub? Okay, so again, the book that we have, Searching for the Dub Sublime, everything's okay there? Yeah, okay. Searching for the Dub Sublime has an explanation of dub, okay? Dub, let's talk, in order to understand what dub is, it's like outer nationalism. Let's work from a literal level. So dub is a type of music. It comes from Jamaican reggae music, and it has to do with studio culture. So I'll explain this in a second. I'll explain this right now. So it comes from this culture, right, of Jamaican reggae, especially 70s sound system culture, which is basically outdoor parties with DJs. DJing goes back to the 1970s. And the idea is that reggae music, like any music, has a band. You have a drummer, you have a guitarist, you have a singer, you have someone playing keyboards. A dub mix is when the studio engineer becomes the musician. They take all those elements and they start manipulating the sound, and they use the mixing board as an instrument. They use echo. You heard the piece of music we heard today. It has lots of echo. It has lots of sonic manipulation. That is dub music. All of you know what remix music is, right? Remix comes from dub, right? To dub something is to make a copy, but it becomes dub as a style if it's a manipulated copy,
right? And it's often very psychedelic. The person we see here is Lee Parry. He was considered the Picasso of dub, the Picasso of the mixing board. And he also has some eccentric, I'm gonna go off page for a second. He used to, when he would record, he would blow ganja smoke all over his studio. And then he would take the tapes and he would bury the tapes in the ground and offer some prayers and ceremonies. And then he would send the tape to the record company to get done. So the idea of dub is to manipulate sound, right? And we all know what records are, right? Vinyl records, yeah? I know the older people do, right? Vinyl records is how we used to listen to music before streaming. Reggae records had an A side and a B side. The A side was the regular version. The B side is the dub mix, that manipulated sonic mix, that very like, you know, yeah, the B side, the underside of the record is the dub mix. So a lot of us would listen to the B side only. We listen to the B side for everything. Okay, that's literal dub. That's what it means literally. In IR, we take this to a metaphorical level. Okay, so this is a mixing board. This is King James mixing board. And the idea is that you have channels, and each channel on the mixing board represents a voice. Okay? And when you're mixing voices, whether they be drums or pianos or echoes or whatever it is, you're mixing those voices and you're creating a dialogue. And that dialogue is what, you know, the Russian philosopher, literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin would call polyphony, many voices speaking together at once. Okay? But the way we look at it is we're using mixology, that metaphor of mixology, to bring voices together across borders to resist, to collectively resist across borders. Okay? All right. So this is outer national dub. I come back to the question that I began with, and that was why? Why would anyone care? Why would anyone do all this stuff? Why would this woman go to the desert to have tea with this Bedouin man? Why would he work with somebody else to do a record about crickety that no one, you know, why would anyone care, right? Why would we care to imagine these people on this street, right? Why would anyone do that? For this, I go to even deeper into the work that IR does. I go into our definition of what dub is, because it's not just fusion for fusion's sake. It's not just mixing for mixing's sake. It's not just that empty hybridity. Oh, we're all mixed up. That's not what this is. It's not also just mixing people from different cultures while leaving out the West. That's not what this is. It's something else, or rather, it has to be something else. Otherwise, it wouldn't be important. So what is it? And that comes back to the deeper question of what is dub. So now I'm going to read our definition from the book. Dub is too often defined as a musical style, a subgenre of reggae music, and its influence on other genres is equally narrow, reduced to the use of echo and reverb effects. That's literal dub, okay? That's literal dub. And so for IR, for our collective, dub is not a thing, but it's the quality of a thing, right? It's the dub quality of anything, which means that anything can have dub. We live in a world, all of us live in a world, where music, as well as other forms of resistance, protest, social justice language are institutionalized, neutralized, devitalized in the colonial capitalist white stream. Dub is the B-side to those moments of assimilation and co-optation. I'll pause here for a second. When I hear my colleagues at work, my white colleagues at work, and I love them, we're all good friends. But when I hear my white colleagues at work using words like decolonization, right? You talking about abolition and talking about, you know, those kinds of, or anti-racism, I start to worry that those words are being assimilated and being devitalized, so that I have to look for a B-side. I have to look for the dub, a new dub, right? Ultimately, we had this in big letters for a reason. Dub is about fermenting trouble. It's about making Babylon tremble. Babylon comes from Rastafarian discourse, which has some relationship to the Bible, but the idea that Babylon is a metaphor for oppression. Babylon is systems and power systems of colonialism, of capitalism, of sexism, of homophobia, of all those things that create oppression. Dub is about making those systems, shaking those systems up, making them tremble. We use echo in the music as a way to shake those systems up metaphorically. It throws our perceptions of how sonic frequencies can and should be used into total disarray. That in itself is what makes dub utterly beautiful, an affirmation of the beauty and unbridled complexity of life. Okay. I want to add one more. This is a recent piece of music that was done last year. This is called Free Palestine. It's an experimental piece of music. It has no beats. It's spoken in Arabic, English, and Spanish, and Lugandan. It's about making awareness about the struggle, in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza that's happening to this day. But freedom for us is also free dub. I'm not going to get into the issue that this represents, although it's worth noting we have Palestine, we have Uganda, and we have Ireland represented. So there's an outer nationalism in the image. But free dub means everything we do in IR is free. Things are not really, there's some things that cost money only to produce, but everything is free. So the book I'm showing you right now is the PDF is for free. This piece of music, which has no beats, and the whole idea is that any DJ could download it and play it at a party to get people, people who are dancing thinking about Palestine, right? In different languages, right? But it's all free. So, like I have this QR code. I can't show it because I don't have the computer, but even with this, you can screenshot if you want to. And this is not advertising. I'm not trying to do advertising here. The whole point is here, we often think that when you do art, you have to get paid. And the whole point here is that no, you can actually make really powerful art by making it for free, because then anyone can access it, right? But yeah, if you click on this, you'll come to the IR website, and that website will say free dub, and the books, the music is all there for free, right? There's no cost. Okay, we can show one more movie? Yeah, we can do one more? Okay, good. I want to end off by talking about the film that we made, When Silence Rises from Earth. Does anyone know who John Cage is? Hands up. Has anyone ever heard of John Cage? Okay, I get to talk to you about John Cage. All right. So John Cage is an experimental, American experimental classical composer. He was pretty crazy. When I say crazy, he was very experimental. He made a piece of music in 1959 called 433. He wrote the music, and the instructions were, the musician must sit at their instrument and not touch their instrument for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, right? And people got mad. The first time this was performed, someone came on stage, they sat at the piano, and they just sat there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. They did not do anything. People were very upset. What is this? But he did this because he wanted to create silence. And he was especially thinking about in the 1950s with mall culture, with malls emerging. He wanted to put a piece of music out where, for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, a musician sits down and they hit record for 4 minutes and 30, and whatever is recorded from that silence, that would then get played over on a sound system. And he wanted, his dream was for any piece of 433 to be played at a mall, to force people to kind of experience silence for 4 minutes and 33 seconds on an ordinary day, to get them to as a way to disrupt the sound system, the sound culture, the soundscape, and to become mindful. And the interesting thing about this, I'm here in India, and there's a connection here because does anyone know who Gita Sarabhai is? Gita Sarabhai comes from the famous Sarabhai family from Gujarat. Her brother, Vikram Sarabhai, helped start the Indian space program in the 1960s. She herself helped start the first electronic music studies program in the 1960s at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. She was friends with John Cage, and she taught him things about, Hindu and Buddhist philosophy and about mysticism. And there's an argument that she actually inspired him or influenced him to think about silence in these ways, right? So she had an influence on the 433 piece. There's lots of recordings of 433. They're interesting, they're okay, but we want to do something different. We had this vision. Let's make 433 in Africa, right? There's lots of 433s that have been recorded in America and in Europe, but let's do something in Africa. And they said, okay, let's do it. We'll get the people from Sankar Dub Resurgence. We'll get them to sit down, and we're going to twist the rules. The rule is to not touch your instrument. What we decided was that they're going to take their drums and They're going to warm their instruments up at a fire. That's how they tune the drums, by using a fire. And then we had one more idea, which was to plaster all the walls with messages, right? Both messages about, like I showed you, Frantz Fanon and all these political anti-colonial figures, but then also spiritual figures, because the idea, and especially during the pandemic, when you do activism, it's exciting, but you can get burnt out. You can get burnt out, right? Manchi ay ni swata bakala paiji first, right? That's why they say those things. So the idea here is to have silence, to prepare, we're going to do something to prepare silence, and preparing the silence for future work to come, because we were all under lockdown at the time. And in this case, it's lockdown in Uganda, there's political unrest, there's power outages, there's rains, and yet somehow we managed to make 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. There's sound at the beginning and the end. It's a mother and son speaking in Arabic, English, and Spanish. They're going to bookend it, and the whole thing is shot with one camera. Okay? So we'll watch this video now. Yeah? Yeah. Stop sharing, right? Oops. There we go.
يرجى تحضير الصمت.
Por favor, prepara el silencio. Please prepare the silence.
Det är som tennas tagdo.
En silencio nos preparamos. In silence we prepare.
Okay, so we've been talking about outer nationalism. We've been talking about collage, connection, communication, collaboration, and creativity. All these different C words, but I think the most important word is that not the C words, but the D words. It's all about about the dub, but specifically the outer nationalist dub. So on that note, we'll pause, take some questions. But I want to thank everyone in advance. And I left my contact here, including my personal email and my Instagram handle, where I'll be, right now I'm taking an upas with social media while I'm in India, but this is where I post stuff as well too. And of course, the QR code there's for anyone who wants to access free dub. And if you have trouble, you can always just email me and I can send you that free dub as well too. You might remember I said that the literal dub is where the studio engineer is the artist. So I want to give special thanks to Gaurav and Misha because the studio engineers in the house have made everything possible today. Let's all give them a nice big clap. They made the dub. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. Can we take some questions? Or? Yes. Yeah. I always tell my students, there's no such thing as a bad question. There's no such thing as a bad question. People who ask questions means that they're thinking. So never be afraid to ask questions. Just ask the question because it's going to help everybody. Oh, stop sharing? Yeah. Maybe the head of the department needs to ask questions. Yes, yeah.
So, with the rise of neo-fascist governments,
Okay.
which is the latest news that we have in North America, which is the Trump administration coming.
Yes.
And we have a number of, and we know that the first, I'm saying it directly actually, like the first laws that is made is directly affecting First Nations, Black people, and even
Okay.
Indians who live there.
Yes.
So, how is it like? What are the ways in which counterculture can counter that? Because in a space where the law itself is kind of restricting the very lives of the people
Right.
who belong to the counterculture. We see transgender rights being taken away,
Right.
women's rights being taken away,
Right.
which is like the abortion rights, which is like the basic of women's health and all.
Okay.
So how, in a space where there is no space
Right.
to exist in,
Right.
so how is the counterculture?
Okay.
functioning in these spaces?
So the question is, how can we have counterculture protests in spaces of neo-fascist regimes like Trump, right? Okay. So I'm going to twist that question a little bit and say, how does outer nationalist resistance, right? How does outer nationalist resistance work? So when I read the papers in India, everyone is upset with Trump, not because of what he's doing to trans people, not because of what he's doing to black people, but what is affecting Indian immigrants in India, right? And of course, the rhetoric in the newspapers here is also Trump is therefore anti-Indian, right? And a lot of the newspapers are worried, a lot of the journalists are worried what is happening to our Indians in America, right? Outer nationalism helps here if we are as worried about Indians under Trump as we are about trans people under Trump, as black people under Trump. And I'll say this as an anecdote. I know a lot of people, they start worrying, like a lot of, especially upper middle class Indians in America who are living well, they worry when things are affecting them, but they don't worry as much when black people are being shot in the streets, or indigenous protesters are being pushed off their lands, or trans students, trans young people are not, are being abused or harassed or whatnot. So the outer nationalism happens in these moments when, Indians, for example, South Asians, as we call ourselves there, right, are standing up against police brutality against black people, right? And I wouldn't necessarily say that black people have to stand with Indians, but it was very important when black people, because there's a power there's a different class, right, between an upper class Indian and middle class Indian and someone who's working class, if not in poverty, and who's an African American. I wouldn't say that person has to stand, but there is something really powerful when and I'll give you an example. We all know about the George Floyd case, right? We all know about the George Floyd case, and where an African-American man was beaten by police, right? And there's some upper middle class Indians I know who were very guilty feeling. They were feeling really guilty. They want to do the right thing, but then they kept on talking about, we had to stop being racist. So it's kind of interesting this happened. But what was more interesting to me was the same month that all these protests happened around George Floyd, a Muslim, South Asian Muslim man who had mental health issues was killed by the police in my part in Toronto. He was killed by the police. My sister went. So this is a case where, yeah, police also attack us too, right? We're not immune to this. No one is immune to oppression, right? And what was really powerful and beautiful, what was very dub, was the protests, because it was a part of Toronto where black and brown people lived together, and black and brown people were in the streets marching, protesting, calling out what the police officer did. And no one believes me when I say this, but I have a witness. My sister was there. She was part of the protest, right? And it scares people. Like, it scares people, meaning like it scares the people who, let's say, for example, police officers or people who authorize police officers. It makes them tremble when they're seeing black and brown people and red people and white people working together to protest this thing, to protest something that doesn't actually affect them directly. Because at some point, it does affect us directly. So I think your question is that, how do you find space when there is no space? And I think space is a perception. We think there's no space, but actually, if you reach out to someone who's different and you start working together, have a cup of tea and look at a book about Dove, then you create space. Then you create space, and it sounds easy. But but then it is hard, but at the same time, it's possible. And that's what this whole thing is about. That this is possible. This is not impossible. This is not unimaginable. This is actual. But I think that's what we have to see, and we do see it, but it doesn't get media attention, right? And and a lot of people in different communities are all, even Black, Indigenous, like there's always people in those communities who are all selfishly looking at their own communities. They're saying the same things that we say in Marathi, right? We're all saying those things. So once we start, caring for someone else's struggle, then we start to see that resistance building, that kind of outer national culture. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I was reminded of this song from the old movie.
Right.
Kisi ke muskurahat.
किसी की मुस्कुराहटों पे होने से।
Yeah.
Okay.
This comes very close to what the nationalism.
Okay.
Basically.
Right.
Trying to work.
Right.
Counter othering.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's kind of understand that we are all others. I talked at the beginning of the talk about 215 bodies being found, of Indigenous children being found. I found out last year that actually British orphaned children, they're called home children, they were being sent from England to just work as servants in North American families. And that's when I said, racism hits everybody. It's not, it even hurts white people, right? So yeah, but what is the translation in the Hindi song? I'm asking the translator. Okay.
I have the lines in front of me. It goes something like this. Kisi ki muskurahaton pe ho nisa. Somebody can translate, please? Anybody who is good at this? किसी का दर्द मिल सके तो नहीं होता. If you can borrow somebody else's pain,
right?
किसी के वास्ते हो तेरे दिल में प्यार. If you have love for somebody else,
right?
जीना इसी का. That is what life is.
Okay, amazing.
Life is when you respond to others.
Amazing.
Is the essence of it.
Amazing. Yeah.
Mukesh.
Okay.
For Raj Kapoor.
Okay. Bollywood dub. Right. Okay. Okay. Can you read it out? It's from Narendra. Is Silence Rises from Earth a protest against political movements of silence inspired by Buddhist traditions? Yeah, from Narendra Gowli. Okay, so Narendra, I would say that there is a connection that idea of 433 was inspired by Buddhist traditions because of what Gita Sarabhai, she was introducing Buddhist traditions to John Cage. So there is definitely that connection between Buddhist traditions and what John Cage imagined for 433. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Are you seeing any examples of outer national dub attitude being created by Indian artists or sound systems? Yes. I don't know enough about it, but there's a fellow in Delhi. His name is Delhi Sultanate. He's a DJ, and he's really interested in Jamaican sound system culture and dub and all these things. So he's I need to learn more about him, but he's working in that vein. When I was in Mumbai last week, I did a tour of Dharavi. And to me, Dharavi is just one big Jugaad city. And I was walking around and I saw hip hop graffiti. And I got really excited. And I was like, okay. But the thing is, I'm not really interested in, because hip hop gets confused. People think hip hop, rap music is a Western thing. And I try to explain to people, no, this comes from African American, like I said in that presentation in Pune 20 years ago, that you have to understand this comes from the Zopper parties of America. But what's really interesting about, Dharavi is that nothing goes to waste. Everything is being used. Waste is being reused. It's being recycled, and something new is being created. And so I talked to one of the people in Dharavi, my tour guide, and I said, I want to know what music or art is going to come out of Dharavi through this use of this method of recycling, because that will be dub. That will be, that will be more exciting than rappers in coming out than Gully Boy or something like that. I love Gully Boy, but that'd be more exciting than that, like, because that would be unique to Dharavi. Like, it won't be something that we'll have seen anywhere else. So I am seeing that. And the other one I would say, historically, one of the big examples of outer nationalism in India is Dalit Panthers. Dalit Panthers being influenced by Black Panthers, right? And I would also encourage you to Google the story of Pandurang Kankoje. I was interested in the Gadar Party, and I know the Gadar parties were made of mostly of Punjabis. As a Maharashtrian living in the West, I want to know if any Maharashtrians were involved with the Gadar Party. It turned out that Pandurang Kankoje was involved, and when the Gadar Party fell apart, he went to Mexico and he worked with Diego Rivera, the husband and artist husband of Frida Kahlo. And so he lived a life speaking Spanish and in Mexico, working with peasants, and before coming back to India at some point. And his daughter has written a book about his life story. So he's another example of that as well too. But I think there's plenty of examples in India. It's really, outer nationalism is always there. And the other one is also there's an African presence in India that's never talked about, like the cities in Gujarat, the cities, even the cities who were part of the battle between Mughals and Peshwas and the Marathas. There were Africans as part of that as well too. Kankoje Angre, his father was Ethiopian, and then Amber Malik from Aurangabad. So I said there's lots of those kinds of cases of outer nationalism. It's really about seeing them. We didn't invent it. We found a word to describe what that looks like, what that kind of hybridity, what that transnationalism looks like, without having the West at the center of it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we do. We do connect. Does our work connect, and do they connect the dub to Adivasi people? Okay, how do I answer this question? Are you seeing any? Oh, it's the same person. Yeah. Are you seeing any examples of outer national dub, and do they connect the dub to Adivasi people? And I would say, I'm still thinking through this, but the one thing I'll say, and I'm trying to do more research about it, we do know that those residential schools that we talk about, I was talking about at the beginning of the talk, there are also 2 million Adivasi children in residential schools in Maharashtra. And so that story is not just a Canadian story. What's happening in these schools, like Gond schools and stuff, there is a connection, but those connections have to be explored deeper. We have mentioned this in IR work, that this is not just a Canadian story, this is also happening in India. It's something that I also want to dig deeper into. Maybe some of you can help me do that too. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Does it make sense? Okay. Did you feel like you learned something today? Okay. Then we're good. Okay. Any thoughts? I'm looking at you. Should we wrap up or? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Do you want to? Okay. Thank you.
Tuned earlier. Maybe
Okay.
we should check out that.
Okay.
That's going to be of some.
This is a bigger group than it was when I walked in. I'd like to do a photo with everybody, if that's okay. Is that possible? It'll make everybody in the global IR collective feel very happy, I think. So let's try it out. There we go. 3. Actually, I have to. Can I give you this?